Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving deep, conducting a full-on forensic investigation into a really bold claim, one that's shaking up history, religion, and archaeology, and it all comes down to a single piece of ancient stone.
So that leads us right to the big question, the one at the very heart of all this. Can a 3,200-year-old stone, just one single artifact, actually prove an entire religion wrong?
Okay, so this is the accusation itself. It comes from a viral video title, and look at this claim. This pharaoh left a stone that accidentally proved Islam wrong. I mean, wow, that's a huge claim, right? It promises definitive proof that could totally rewrite history. So yeah, let's dive in and see what's going on.
All right, so first up, a stone's accusation. We're going to start by getting to know the accuser and, of course, the ancient artifact that's at the center of this whole thing.
Okay, so where is this claim even coming from? Well, it's not from some dry academic paper. It's from a YouTube channel called Roar of Grace, which focuses on Christian apologetics. And, they kind of frame history and archaeology as this zero-sum game, like a battleground. For them, for one truth to win, another one has to lose. Now, understanding that perspective is absolutely crucial as we dig into this.
But look, underneath all that YouTube drama and the digital noise, there is a real physical object, a witness, and this is it, the Merneptah Stele. We're talking about a 10.5-foot tall slab of solid black granite, carved way back around 1208 BC. I mean, this thing has survived for over 3,000 years. It's right there in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. It's real, and it has a story to tell.
Okay, let's get to the witness itself. Who found this thing, and what's its story? Now, what's really fascinating about this stone's journey is that, well, it was recycled. Yeah, apparently Pharaoh Merneptah was maybe cutting some costs back in 1208 BC. So instead of quarrying a whole new monument, he just grabbed an old one that belonged to Pharaoh Amenhotep III, flipped it over, and carved his own victory hymn on the back. It's kind of poetic, right? A perfect little hint of the modern fights over its meaning. One history literally written on top of another.
So, fast forward to 1896. The famous archaeologist Sir Flinders Petrie is digging in Thebes, and he finds this thing. And he knew right away that he'd hit the jackpot. He even said, "This stele will be better known in the world than anything else I have found." And why was he so excited? Because this was the first ever physical proof from ancient Egypt of a people called Israel. It was huge. It completely broke centuries of archaeological silence on the topic.
All right, now for the testimony itself. Let's decode what the pharaoh's words, these ancient hieroglyphs, actually say. Because, the proof is always in the details.
So the key line in this whole victory poem reads, "Israel is laid waste, its seed is no more." Okay, classic pharaoh talk, right? Super dramatic. Merneptah is basically just boasting about a military campaign in Canaan. And like any good propagandist, he's claiming he totally wiped out his enemies. But here's the thing. The real clue, the smoking gun, isn't what he said, but how his scribe wrote that one specific name, Israel. And this is where we get to the core archaeological point of the whole video. You see, Egyptian scribes used these little symbols at the end of words, they're called determinatives, to tell you what kind of word it is. So for names like Ascalon or Gezer, which were cities, he used the hieroglyph for a foreign city. Makes sense. But for Israel, he used a totally different symbol, the one for a foreign people.
So what does that little people marker actually imply? Well, here's the big takeaway. This tiny linguistic detail, this choice of one symbol over another, is a huge piece of outside evidence. It shows that to the Egyptians back in 1208 BC, Israel wasn't a big city-state with a capital like Ashkelon. No, they were seen as a socio-ethnic group, a people. And guess what? That aligns perfectly with how the early books of the Bible described them, as a pre-monarchy, tribal society living in the highlands of Canaan. It's a match. Okay, so the stone's testimony is solid. The archaeology checks out. Now it's time to cross-examine the video's main claim, the big, explosive one. Does any of this really prove Islam wrong?
All right, first, let's put the stele up against Islam's holy book, the Quran. Now, you might expect a huge contradiction here, right? But what we find is actually kind of surprising. The stone doesn't contradict the Quran at all. In fact, it pretty much aligns with it. The Quran is filled with references to the children of Israel, Bani Israel, and talks about them entering the Holy Land. So the stele, which places a people called Israel in Canaan around 1208 BC, actually, well, it backs up the basic historical premise you find in the Quran. No contradiction here.
However, there is something the stele directly contradicts, and that's a modern political narrative known as temple denial.
Now, this is the idea put forward by some modern political figures that there's simply no real archaeological proof of any ancient Jewish history in the land. And to that claim, the Merneptah Stele is basically a 10-foot-tall, 3,200-year-old piece of granite saying, actually, yes, there is.
And this, right here, is the key. It's the rhetorical sleight of hand at the heart of the video's claim. You see, the video is right that the stela debunks this modern temple denial narrative, but it then makes a huge leap. It takes that modern political idea and wrongly labels it as representing the entire religion of Islam and its ancient scriptures. It's conflating the two. It's mixing up modern politics with ancient theology, and that's a really important distinction.
So, we've looked at the evidence, we've decoded the language, we've examined the claims. What's the final verdict?
Let's just break it down with this verification matrix. Is the stela's discovery and date accurate? Yes, true. Do the hieroglyphs identify Israel as a people? Absolutely, true. Does this prove Israel existed in Canaan by 1208 BC? You bet, true. Okay, but does this prove the Quran wrong? Well, no, that's false. But does it prove the modern political idea of temple denial wrong? Yes, it does. That's true. So you can see the video's archaeology is solid, but its big theological claim, that's where it gets complicated.
So where does that leave us on the original video's accuracy? Well, the analysis this explainer is based on gives it a pretty high score, actually, an 85%. It gets high marks for getting the archaeology right, but it loses points for that one critical mistake, confusing modern politics with ancient scripture.
And that leaves us with this one final, really profound irony. Think about it. A pharaoh, at the absolute height of his power, commissioned this monument. He intended to announce the end of a people, to literally carve their obituary into stone. And now, 3,000 years later, that lie, that boastful lie, has become the ultimate truth of their survival. The very stone meant to erase them from history is now one of the most powerful pieces of proof that they were there all along.